I just recently made a video about the new Raids 3 staff, and I've seen loads of comments about power creep. It's been a long-standing discussion and fear of the old school community in general. As a prior Runescape 3 player who has seen true, extreme power creep, I'd like to weigh in. This is a long-standing issue with game design in general, and any game within an economy has their own way of dealing with it. It's an extremely complicated topic. Power creep in general is less of a problem than it's made out to be by the old school community. Power creep is, oh thank you Google, the gradual unbalancing of a game due to successive releases of new content, leaving the older ones underpowered. We commonly use the term devaluing. This could be anything. The obvious ones are Blowpipe devaluing crossbows and T-bow furthering devaluing Blowpipe with their release. Most people are thinking new weapons or gear, but any update added to the game devalues something. The recent Guardians of the Rift update removed the long delay after crafting essence at an altar. This could be considered power creep. Even something as simple as the addition of shift-click dropping made much content easier. Any update that adds something is going to devalue something else. This is a major problem for many different game genres. Card games especially have a very tough time curbing this. Why is power creep a bad thing? It devalues content, old bosses become easier, and items become irrelevant to grind for from an economic standpoint. This is actually the main reason a lot of people play an Iron Man. It gives a reason to kill less relevant bosses, although power creep is still a problem even for Iron Man. Zulrah's uniques have become less and less useful over time, but the amount she gets grinded hasn't changed. Therefore, the value from killing her has decreased over time. Same with Chambers, Tob, Nightmare, God War's Dungeon, nearly every Slayer boss. The list basically includes every single boss that has ever come out. Well, it's inevitable. We should just revert the game to as it was in 2007 and just stop adding updates. Every single update ever added was power creep in one way or another. There's no solution, and we should just allow everything to fall into decay. Or we can do as every other MMO has done and accept that a small amount of power creep is acceptable, but still try to curb it in various ways. A great example of absurd power creep was back in RS2, when Nex was added initially. She also dropped Torva armor like she does in OSRS, but also dropped Pernix, which is extremely powerful ranged armor. It's what Masori's is going to be from Raids 3. As well as Virtus, which is cracked out ancestral armor, and the Zerite bow, which was simply the best ranged weapon. Arguably equal to the chaotic crossbow, which was out at the time. Keep in mind, RS2 had no ancestral armor, so their best mage robes at the time were still air rims. What's great about OSRS is that they've had the other game to look at and avoid making the same mistakes. Where RS2 immediately added Torva after Bando's armor as the next upgrade, OSRS fleshed out the armors with Inquisitors, which is great for crust damage and landing hammers, and Justiciar, which is the best tank armor. Is this still power creep? Yes, it is, but it fleshes out your options instead of your choices being, wow, I wish I could use Torva, but all I can afford is Bando, so I'll use that. We also have sunk items using the previous in the line to keep them relevant. Torva consumes Bando's armor to create it, the Abyssal Tentacle consumes Abyssal Whips to be swung, etc. Bunch of items that do that. Whereas back in RS2, they threw caution to the wind and simply let these items become irrelevant completely. The problem is if no new updates come out, the same thing happens regardless. Honestly, I think the old school team has been a bit overly cautious over time in adding new BIS items, as we've seen this in loads of bossing locations. Given enough time to grind content, eventually supply outweighs demand. People have finally mastered both Tob and Cox, and the drops have gone down in value accordingly, even the ones that are still BIS, like Scythe and T-bow, although these have held up the best over time. We've seen it most obviously with Nightmare, where she still drops a good chunk of BIS upgrades like Inquisitors and the Nightmare Staves, but she's dropped from around 12 mil GP an hour to 4 due to huge amounts of farmers and bots. Power creep and inflation go hand in hand. They affect each other in various ways, and typically are caused by similar issues. With no new bosses to use the old weaponry, the supply of those items will eventually catch up to demand, and devalue them regardless of if they are devalued by new items. Old school RuneScape has done an amazing job of curbing power creep in the past compared to most other games. They try to fill out each bracket for combat, instead of simply adding BIS over and over, really lazily and easily adding new weapons and armor. I've discussed the 3 different melee armors they added, but we should talk weapons. Abyssal Whip was the OG best melee weapon, upgrading to the Tentacle Whip later. This was outclassed a bit by the Grazi Rapier when that came out, with side grades for Slash and the Blade of Saildor from Gauntlet, and Crush with Inquisitor's Mace from Nightmare. There's also the Dragon Hunter Lance, which is best for dragons, the Din's Bulwark and Zemi-Hasta, both great for tanking bosses. There's also Darox, which is exceptional, only at extremely low HP, Obsidian Knife, which is great against very low defense monsters with the full set armor. And finally, there's the Scythe of Vitur, our best slash melee weapon, and typically the best regardless as long as the target is 3x3 or larger. We have similarly fleshed out weapons for ranged and mage as well. Meanwhile, on RS2, we had the Abyssal Whip as our best melee weapon, with the typical niche variants like Zamihasta and Darox. And then Dungeoneering came out and introduced all of the chaotic weapons, making Chaotic Rapier the new best in slot. That's the exact same as our Grazi Rapier. Dungeoneering also did the same for the other tiers as well, adding the Chaotic Staff and Chaotic Crossbow, best for their respective weapon style, as well as the Chaotic Maul for their best crush weapon, and Chaotic Longsword for their best slash weapon. Even the best shield, the Chaotic Kite Shield, was added with Dungeoneering. This left loads of weapons to rot, like the Armadale Crossbow. They had no Blowpipe, the Abyssal Whip, and the Staff of Light. One single update added the best in slot weapons for every single combat style while also not syncing a single prior weapon. RS2 had no Blowpipe, no Trident, no Sangstaff, before immediately jumping to chaotic weaponry, outdating everything. Buckle in, I'm going to be talking about RS3 for 30 seconds, so hang in there. This had such major economic implications that years down the line, it required the addition of an entirely new skill to solve it, Invention. Even chaotic weaponry by this point was basically a mid-tier set of weaponry at best, with the boss Araxor having every single BIS weapon attached to him, the scythe, the staff, and the bow. Invention allowed you to perk out your weapons with augmentations created with broken down weapons. More powerful combinations of perks required more powerful weapons to be destroyed for components. A great example is their scythe equivalent, the Noxious Scythe, being broken down to create an augmentation that could provide your weapons with a 5% damage bonus. Any irrelevant weapon in the past with a unique component given to it suddenly had value. This is why any unique clue scroll item in RS3 is worth over $1 million. They give you components. Invention was easily the best new skill ever added to RS3, but that's a discussion for another video. This likely won't become necessary for years with OSRS because the devs are so careful with each addition to the game, adding only what is necessary to keep gear fresh, and keeping in mind the older gear, either syncing it out of the game in various ways, or keeping it relevant in niche situations. The GE tax was an ingenious, simple solution that gives the old school team power over how many items are in the game at a given time. A small amount of power creep is not only inevitable, it is necessary to keep a game fun and interesting. It just needs to be maintained with checks and balances. If Chambers didn't have a twisted bow, if Tob didn't have a scythe, they would be so much less fun and interesting to do. Those mega rare and valuable drops create some of the most fun and interesting moments in the game. The old school team has decided recently that now is an okay time to start adding some actual BIS to the game, in Torva and Masori's armors. And that is a good thing. When it becomes difficult for the team to come up with any enticing rewards that are comparable to others, that means that weapon or armor tier is fully fleshed out and it's time to move on to the next. Raids need solid rewards to be interesting and engaging. It's part of the full picture of what makes a raid enjoyable. Keeping your gear choices interesting for a given piece of content is also part of what keeps raids engaging. How many switches you can afford and the impact of each switch is drastically different at any given piece of content. You might want one person in a challenge mode raid to bring Torva so their BGS special attacks land harder. Maybe the rest of the team rocks Inquisitors to land hammer specs. One person in a hard mode Tob might bring the full range switch to more quickly kill Maiden Nilocus piles with chins or deal with the Nilocus room better, while the rest of the team skimps on the range switch as they won't be doing as much as the Ranger. Even if a weapon is not necessarily BIS everywhere, Bofa is only really best in slot at Bandos and some Chambers rooms, for example. If it is easier to get your hands on the lower tier weaponry, it will still have value to people who cannot afford the higher tier. I can't talk about power creep without mentioning the toxic Blowpipe, the worst case of power creep in OSRS history by far. This was added with Zulrah towards the beginning of OSRS's inception. It was pulled and intended to have an attack speed of 3 ticks, but when creating it, JMods literally forgot about the rapid attack speed reducing the attack speed by a tick. Back then, the devs were much less experienced and had much worse tools to work with, so Zulrah was added with many glaring oversights. Even when the Twisted Bow came out later, considered the most powerful weapon in the game even to this day by most people, the Blowpipe was so incredibly overpowered it challenged the power of Twisted Bow in many locations, even where the Twisted Bow should be best. A mid-level boss dropping arguably the best ranged weapon in the game, a little bit absurd, just a tiny bit. Years later, the devs decided nerfing the Blowpipe was the best approach, allowing some other weapons to shine in its tier like the Bofa. I honestly think that Blowpipe is still fairly overpowered. It has truly shaped the direction this game has taken in many ways. I'll talk about the Shadow specifically. People are worried it is going to completely devalue the Twisted Bow and Scythe, and that they need to panic sell their stuff and only buy into mage gear or something like that. The Shadow of Tumeken is far less useful than the Twisted Bow or Scythe is. It is better than T-Bow in about 4 locations, and better than Scythe in about 2, equal in a few. It's an amazing option in places where bosses don't have ridiculously high magic level, but requires you to consider which gear switches you will bring, and if the defense you have is an important factor, as Ancestral is paper thin when it comes to defense. The Shadow is a tactical choice, and still keeps everything relevant instead of simply replacing T-Bow or Scythe. Like I said, any addition to the game does devalue other things in some way, but this devalues T-Bow and Scythe in such a small and calculated way that it really isn't a concern. It is balanced. Scythe will still shred large, melee weak bosses. T-Bow still annihilates anything with a high mage level and lower defense. The Shadow will simply shred anywhere a boss has a lower magic level where you can bring the gear to use it. If you're catching this as it goes up, I will be live on Twitch. I just recently unlocked the Verzik helmet from the Master Tier of Combat achievements, and therefore can get 2 Inferno task attempts per task. I'll be pushing to get that sub 50 Inferno by throwing in Scythe Tech. So if you want to see me flounder with new gear, come check it out.
All right, bye.
And that's it for the video. Leave a like if you liked it, and or subscribe. Thanks, guys.